Is this thing on? Oh, shit. Hello, and welcome to the YouTube channel for Lost Archive Studios. I am the Archivist, and today I've invited you here because I want to talk to you about a game. But I can assure you, this is not just any game. This is the best game, the most amazing, the most awesomest game, perhaps, of all time. Yes, in fact, some people, and very smart people they are, have said that this game is groundbreaking, mind-melting, life-changing, and some have even ventured to refer to this game as a dream game. But what kind of dream is this? Who will be doing all the dreaming, and how are their dreams so vivid and lifelike? All of these questions will be answered in due time, but first, let me describe this dream to you. Imagine a role-playing game set in a science fiction universe with space pirates, magical abilities, exotic narcotic substances, and partial nudity. In this game, you would play as your own custom character with a background just vague enough for you to impose your own backstory crafted with your C-grade fanfiction level writing skills. You could fight bandits, you could fight exotic space creatures, and you would be given an amount of narrative and mechanical freedom that would allow you to play as a hero, a villain, or anything in between. There would be deep dialogue and narrative RPG mechanics, with branching quests and multiple different story outcomes depending on your choices and character build. And all of this would come wrapped in a unique, handcrafted, cartoony art style that meshes seamlessly with the writer's tasteful, irreverent yet grounded and impactful storytelling. Now, you might be thinking to yourself,
yeah, that would be cool, but I'm only interested in playing games draped in my favorite slop IP, owned by a massive corporate entity whose only motivation is to maximize shareholder profit.
but what if I told you that's what big corporate wants you to think?
Huh?
You don't want to be a mind slave, do you?
I guess not.
Do you want to break free from the matrix created by your corporate overlords and enjoy true, artisanal storytelling?
Sure.
Good. Because this dream game will be created using its own IP, its own setting, and it will feature a brand new cast of mostly legally distinct characters, and it will be way better than whatever slop that big corporate has been feeding you recently.
Yeah, I guess it has been pretty bad.
This sounds amazing, right?
Yeah.
You want to play this super special, awesome dream game, correct?
You bet I do.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. But I regret to inform you that as we speak, there is still one thing preventing you from playing this dream game. And this is true, because the only reason why you can't go to your device of choice and play this game right now is because we haven't finished it yet.
Aw, man. I want to play it now.
I know. This is terrible. Calamitous news even. But I can promise all will be well, because as you watch this video, we are hard at work building this dream game so that you might one day be fortunate enough to play it for yourself.
Yay!
And if you want to ensure that you don't miss out on this amazing game when it is released, please remember to like, subscribe, and follow our social media accounts linked in the description for smaller, more frequent progress updates.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm gonna go do it right now.
Why, thank you, loyal viewer. We promise not to let you down. Now then, let's get started with some formal introductions and let's get this show on the road.
I guess I'll go ahead and start the introductions off. Hello everyone, my name's Ben and I'm the game's initial creator and lead developer.
And I'm the Archivist, the game's creative executive officer and narrative director / dictator, and we're excited to be sharing our first devlog for our in-progress sci-fi RPG game.
With this project, we've set out to create a cartoony and action-packed top-down sci-fi shooter with deep role-playing mechanics set in a dynamic and reactive world. Although this is a fairly large project for our studio's first game, we're a little over a year into development now, and we're starting to get a better idea of our ability to execute on this vision. Our goal with this devlog series is to allow you to keep up with our progress, and we hope that you'll stick around for the journey so you can contribute feedback and help shape the direction of the project. When starting work on the game, we pretty much had no clue what we were doing. While I had some limited coding experience, neither of us had ever worked on, let alone shipped a game before. And additionally, both my brother and I are fairly unsophisticated in our ability to do visual art. So it took us quite a while for us to be able to figure out how we wanted to do the art for the game. However, despite a complete lack of relevant experience to lean on at the outset, We jumped in blind and kept bashing our heads against the wall to make progress, while developing the skills that we would need along the way. I started development on the game by making a very rough prototype, which primarily consisted of a simple level design, shooting mechanics, and some basic enemy AI. At this stage, we were mostly just testing to see if the game would even be fun to play, and if it was worth investing the time it would require to flesh the idea out further. The good news is, after some playtesting by both ourselves and several friends, we determined that the prototype was in fact fun, and it was a good learning experience for me as I started putting the pieces together in Unity. This early build was heavily based off of references and mechanics from games that my brother and I had played, such as Streets of Rogue, but in the process of creating the prototype, my brother and I were able to get an understanding of the unique direction that we wanted to take the game. We knew that beyond just making a simple shooter game, we wanted to make a game with compelling role-playing mechanics, as both my brother and I were really big into RPGs when growing up. Additionally, we realized that if we really leaned heavily into the strengths of our game's simple 2D perspective, we would have a much easier time creating environments and content for the game than if we had a more complex visual style. And we knew that it was going to be a lot easier to create AI that felt sophisticated and believable for a game based off of a 2D grid rather than a 3D environment, and that we could utilize this advantage to populate an open world with NPCs that felt highly reactive. So while working on this early demo, we really started to iron out the vision that we had for the type of game that we wanted to make. One of the early changes that we settled on was to have a slightly more zoomed out perspective for our camera, and this was a decision that we came to based off of early playtesting. I'd say that the majority of top-down shooter games tend to opt for a much closer camera perspective, which complements more fast-paced, close-quarters style of combat. However, this isn't the only way to do things, and we quickly determined that for an RPG like the one we were trying to make, it was important to accommodate a wide variety of different playstyles, and that having a zoomed-out camera, which covered a lot more space, made it possible to engage enemies at both shorter and longer distances. Now that we had put together a somewhat promising proof of concept, in the next stage of development, my brother went off to try and figure out what we were going to do with the art and the setting for the game. Meanwhile, I put together a better playtesting environment so that I could properly refine the combat. I spent the majority of this period implementing the systems that we would really need to test our game. This included better shooting mechanics, a more modular gun system, weapon recoil systems, basic stealth and detection systems, enemy auditory senses, combat healing systems, improved pathfinding and combat behaviors, and that's just to name a few. We'll dive deeper into many of these topics in future devlogs, but today I wanted to focus specifically on how I structured our AI brains, as this has been a major focus for us since we started development. At the very beginning of the project, I started by constructing our AI brains with a classic state machine structure. But over time, the connections between the states became too unruly to manage, and it became too difficult to create the very behavior that we wanted to implement. I thought I had found a good solution to this problem when I switched to using a behavior tree system built with the Node Canvas Unity asset. When creating my behavior trees, I ended up loving the utility node, which allowed me to create much more interesting behaviors. And over time, the AI began to feel much smarter, and more importantly, the NPCs started behaving less robotically and more human-like. However, I eventually became frustrated with the way that I was using the Node Canvas system. I realized that in many cases, the individual behaviors that I wanted the AI to do were actually quite simple, and yet it took a complicated string of nodes to be able to make any basic computations. Over time, my behavior tree system had stopped looking very tree-like anymore. Essentially, the way that I was using behavior trees ended up making many of the things that should have been easy harder, without actually making any of the hard things easier for me to implement. This is when I realized it was time to take a more simple approach to the AI brain structure. Because I loved the feel of the utility node so much, I decided to switch to an AI system based entirely off of the utility principles, similar to the AI architecture of The Sims or other simulation games such as RimWorld. Our AI takes in information from its vision and auditory sensors, then combines this with the information its allies have shared with it. Each task then uses specific bits of information that are relevant to the task to calculate a priority value of how important that task is relative to the other tasks, with that value normally ranging from 0 to 100. Whatever task is the highest priority value at the time is the task that the AI will then enter. The priority values of idle, non-combat tasks, such as wandering around or eating food, normally range between 5 to 30 at all times, whereas the value of combat tasks range between 40 and 70 while in combat, but have a priority of 0 while not in combat. However, a task such as fleeing combat can have a much higher range. While fleeing is normally very low priority, the priority value of the flee task is tied to the health of the AI, as well as a few other factors. And so when the NPC is at low health, the priority of the fleeing skyrockets up to around 80, typically leading them to enter the flee task. Unless, of course, there is another task with an even higher priority value at the moment. This type of system might sound a little complex on a conceptual level, and admittedly, my explanation might also be a little hard to follow. But in practice, it's very easy for me to work with, especially since I don't need to completely rework my behavior tree's hard-coded paths every time I want to add a new behavior, and the fact that these priority value numbers are able to constantly float and change based off of new information presented to the AI is what leads to the dynamic and reactive behavior of the AI. In combat, it was important for us that the NPCs could share information amongst each other, but that the information would be stored locally on each NPC's brain, and would only get passed to their neighbors individually. That way, information gradually permeates throughout a group, such that the NPCs that are furthest away generally react later than those that are nearby. Ultimately, our goal was to make NPCs that could coordinate together instead of all acting individually. But we also wanted to avoid whole groups of NPCs sharing the exact same information at the same time, because it might result in enemies that weren't as fun to fight because they simply felt too robotic. Obviously, in certain circumstances, enemies could instantly share information across a whole group. Perhaps if you were fighting a group of drones all linked by the same network, for example. But for the default NPC behavior, we wanted to make sure that the combatants didn't have access to more information than seemed reasonable based off of their circumstances. Another key philosophy behind the design of the AI brain and the behaviors was for the NPCs to function the exact same when fighting the player as when fighting other AI combatants, and for the AI to be able to competently fight multiple opponents at one time. This includes the ability for the AI brain to conduct an analysis of threat level based off of the quantity and relative strength of its nearby allies compared to the same factors for whoever they are fighting. This analysis can be used to inform a variety of decisions for our NPCs, such as the decision to execute a tactical retreat, either as an individual or as a squad. And in the long term, we think it would be interesting to incorporate this kind of analysis into pre-combat decision making as well. This could manifest in instances where an outnumbered two-man caravan would intentionally move to avoid the detection of a larger hostile squad if they come across them while traveling in the open world. But of course, this would only happen if the two-man group spots the other first. I think these kinds of AI behaviors can add a lot to the believability of a world with multiple ongoing conflicts, and having unscripted clashes between factions in the open world also creates opportunities for more dynamic combat encounters, where the player feels as if they're not the sole driver of conflicts in the world. Plus, maybe this is just me, but watching the AI fight each other is actually super entertaining and really satisfying. My goal from the beginning has been to make the AI feel alive, not just like predictable disposable cannon fodder that the game throws at the player. This doesn't mean that our AI needs to be incredibly intelligent, or that they need to make perfect tactical decisions, but rather that I needed to create systems that allow for the NPCs to react dynamically based off of a variety of factors at once, which will hopefully result in a more interesting emergent behavior that is fun for the player to interact with. While there will certainly be more additions, changes, and potential refactorings in the future, I'm fairly happy with how they work at the moment. Ultimately, I want it to be possible to take on groups of enemies in a large variety of ways, so players can express their creativity. Whether you want to sneak, go guns blazing, or provoke other enemies to fight each other for you, we want to give players multiple ways to engage with dangerous situations, and we want to create a highly reactive world that responds very differently based off of how the player decides to engage with it. Anyways, that's my time for this devlog, so I'm gonna go ahead and hand you off to the Grand Archivist, knower of all things, so he can tell you a bit more about what he's been working on for the last year.
Hello viewers, it's me again. And while our resident techno-wizard was busy putting together systems and handling all that boring technical stuff, I was busy working on far more interesting things, like art. Now, I'm gonna level with you. Even a being of superior design, such as myself, cannot be good at everything. And thus, I will admit, while I have been gifted with many natural aptitudes and talents, the visual arts has never been my primary area of expertise. And yet, as creative executive officer and narrative director here at Lost Archive Studios, I found myself responsible for creating and shaping the game's artistic direction in the early days of development. If I had to sum up my opinions on my initial character mockups into one word, I would probably describe them as unsatisfactory. While it's clear I had some sense of direction for where I wanted to take the characters, the designs themselves were pretty rough. So much so that after spending several days trying to improve upon my designs, eventually I tried to enlist the talent of some artists advertising their services on the hyperweb. This was mainly just to see if they could adapt my basic concepts and create a simple human template that we could work off of. But unfortunately, in the end, I wasn't particularly impressed with any of the designs that the artists sent back. While they weren't necessarily bad, I felt their designs didn't quite capture that je ne sais quoi, that special, almost divine inspiration that I was searching for. And as a result, it became clear that I was going to have to go back to the drawing board and keep refining my designs until I produced something better, something truly unique, something altogether more amazing than anything that has come before it. Now look, I lack a lot of the artistic skills that help create good-looking art, including the ability to see colors properly, owing to the faulty sensors in my camera eyes. However, the one skill I do have is the ability to see strong shapes in my mind's eye. So in crafting a design, I generally know the broad strokes of what I would like the design to look like, I just don't know what steps need to be taken in order to get it there. And as a result, I end up having to design and iterate through brute force by making countless revisions. This is readily apparent when looking back at my early designs, but after many hours spent grinding away in Sprite, I was eventually able to develop a visual style that worked well for weapon designs, and then, in my great wisdom, I was able to use the lessons I learned from the weapons to reverse engineer the character designs until they looked the way that I wanted. In the early stages, I utilized references from a variety of fantastic indie titles, including Death Road to Canada, Enter the Gungeon, Streets of Rogue, as well as many others. But there was one major thing that needed to be adapted in order to make the game that we wanted to make. Fairly early on, we determined that we would have to increase the pixel count of our designs. Now, it's generally accepted that the higher your pixel count is, the longer it will take to make assets. In fact, it's pretty normal for a lot of freelance pixel artists to charge based on pixel count. But for a role-playing game, we wanted to make sure that human NPCs could look visually distinct from one another even without additional props, such as hats or accessories. Therefore, we decided to create larger characters, but to remain highly intentional with detail in order to keep the design language simple enough to cut down on how long it takes to make something. Through a lot of trial and error, we ended up with standard characters that are 43 pixels wide and almost 80 pixels tall, which is considerably bigger than a lot of similar pixel art games. But I knew that such an approach would allow us to create a great canvas that will be versatile enough for us to do a lot of impressive things with character designs in the future. For customization, we decided it would be best to split everything up into layers. That way we could mix and match different hairs, tattoo designs, skin colors, outfits, and other accessories to make characters that look meaningfully different from each other. In order to stitch these layers together, we'll be borrowing a technique from Streets of Rogue by having the majority of our sprites animate smoothly in-engine using the Unity animator. In fact, for the basic human characters, at the moment, the only parts of their body that are animated with pixel art are the legs, which for the time being only have a simple 4-frame walking animation. We intend to clean this animation up and potentially add more frames to make it feel smoother once the project is a little bit more content-rich, but it might be a little while before we get around to that, so bear with us for the time being. There are other elements of the character designs that could probably benefit from having animations, but right now we're far more focused on making content and systems for the game, so we'll be leaving that kind of visual polish till much later in development. At the end of the day, with my superior creative vision and intellect, it was probably best that I figured out the character designs on my own, as I always had a strong idea of how I wanted the characters to look, and it's simply unrealistic to expect a mere mortal artist to understand my substance-inspired artistic visions without some very good points of reference. But now that I've made some good points of reference, it's become a lot easier for me to explain the art style and what I'm looking for from an artist. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm very happy to inform everyone that we have successfully obtained the skills of an artist who has been gracious enough to join our team. We'll be introducing them and highlighting their work properly in future devlogs, but we did want to show off a taste of some of their fantastic work so far. Suffice to say, they've done an amazing job at expanding and enhancing the original art style, and they're a lot faster at making assets than I am, which is huge for a project with the amount of assets we are going to need. And it also has the added benefit of freeing me up to apply my fantastical talents to other elements of the project. To wrap up, I find myself fairly pleased with how the characters have turned out thus far, and I believe that our sprite layering system will allow for a huge amount of variation, both for our NPCs and our player characters. But that being said, I would still be eternally grateful if you could provide us with some honest feedback on our character designs and the art style in general. Whether you love it, hate it, or find yourself somewhere in between, your honest feedback and critique will be super helpful in informing our decisions as we continue to develop this game. So we'd really appreciate it if you let us know what you think about our character designs down in the comment section below. Oh, and with that, it looks like we're out of time for this week. We're going to wrap up this devlog so we can get back to work on the game, but look forward to hearing from us every couple of weeks going forward. We're aiming to publish a devlog on this YouTube channel about once every 3 to 4 weeks, but we're going to try and keep future devlogs shorter so that we don't get sidetracked by making YouTube videos such that it slows down our development progress. So, if you want to keep up with our development journey, be sure to subscribe and consider following us on our fledgling X, Bluesky, and Instagram accounts. Thank you so much for watching this video till the end. We look forward to seeing you here again soon. Bye for now.